My name is Trevor Lecka. I'm Dubsado's Customer Education Specialist. And today we're doing a webinar on recurring invoices. This is kind of a continuing theme of our webinars for September so far. Earlier this month, we did webinars on our built-in automations in Dubsado, as well as another webinar on time management. And recurring invoices play really well into both of those fields, essentially, right? The idea of a recurring invoice is essentially to save you time to automate a lot of your work and to get paid automatically, which is the biggest thing, obviously. And setting one of these things up can help you manage your time effectively because you're not having to worry about sending out the next invoice for a particular client. So I think this is sort of the capstone on this 3-week idea we're working on here with saving time with time management and using what Dubsado has at your disposal to go ahead and automate as much as possible. So today's webinar is going to be another entirely live demo. I'm going to be going through a Dubsado account and showing y'all how to set up a recurring invoice. We're going to talk about the do's and don'ts, right? Like there's particular ways to set up a recurring invoice that are going to function the most effectively. I'll show you sort of the couple things you probably ought to know before you set one up as far as communication is concerned. We'll talk about autopay, all the nitty gritty things to go ahead and make you feel confident to use recurring invoices in your day-to-day business. So without any further ado, let me drag my screen over here real quick. And as normal, folks, if you have questions, I want you please to feel free to throw them in the chat as I'm talking. I'll do my best to keep my eye on the chat throughout the entire webinar, and I will just answer your questions as they come up. So if you see something that doesn't quite make sense, or you want further information on, more clarity on, please throw it in the chat. I'll be happy to answer it on stream here. Okay, let me go ahead and start sharing my screen. Should be that one. There we go. Can everyone see that all right? Yeah, looks good to me. Cool. Okay, so to get us going here, I'm just here on our main projects page in my webinar demo brand here. And if we're recalling correctly that we want to set up an automation, we're going to first go to a project. So we're going to jump straight into a project. Recurring invoices are a little bit different than some of our other templated items out in Dubsado, where there's not really a base recurring invoice template. We're going to build one for each individual project that we want to send them to. So just for starters, like I said, we're going to walk through creating one, and then we're going to look at some more of the specifics. So for now, what I'm going to do is click into this Jess Brown project right here. And just to begin with, I already set up a recurring invoice last week so I could show you all kind of the finished product, and we'll kind of build our way back towards that. So we'll set up another recurring invoice for Jess. Not necessarily a realistic scenario to have 2 separate recurring invoices for one client, but you certainly could. Now here I am in the project. I'm going to go to the Invoices tab. Now, in the Invoices tab, I'm going to go to the invoice list, and we'll see all the invoices we have within this project. And I know because I set this up earlier that invoice 5 is actually created from a recurring invoice that I had set up. So if I click into this particular invoice, we can see this looks like any other invoice. And that's sort of the idea with a recurring invoice is we're going to set up the recurring invoice here in the project, and it's going to generate individual invoices at whatever cadence that I want it to make those invoices at, right? I have lots of options as far as how often I want those invoices to be generated. But it's going to come out looking like a very normal invoice that you would regularly see in Dubsado. So to back up a step further, right, the recurring invoice generated this invoice, but let's actually look at how that recurrence was set up. So if I go to recurring invoices here, now I can click into this actual recurrence. If I had more than one recurring invoice, they would appear here in this list. And this list is a handy way to check kind of what's going on within the recurring invoices of the project, because it's showing me some pretty important information about this recurrence, right? I can see that I started this back a week ago, and I can see that I have it ending in the beginning of October. It's going to tell me the next time that this recurrence is going to create an invoice. And I can also see how many invoices this particular recurrence has sent. In this case, it's just one. Additionally, I have the ability to see if autopay is turned on or off for this particular recurrence. Good morning, Danielle. Sorry, I just saw that. Cool. So just at a glance, if we're clicking into the recurring invoices section of our invoices tab, that's how I'll be able to see some information at a glance about any recurrences I have in the project. But let's actually look at the details if I click into it. So here is the recurrence schedule, right? I can see some of that same information here at the top about when it was started, how often it's sending it out. In this case, I set it to send once every week, right? I think the most common scenario for many of our users is not necessarily weekly invoices, probably going to be more on a monthly cadence. Just to reiterate and maybe to state the obvious, recurring invoices are really fantastic for things like subscriptions or retainers, right? When you're billing your clients on a regular cadence for the same amounts every single time. That's the ideal use case for a recurring invoice. And we'll talk more about why that is the case in a little bit. Anyhow, so scrolling through a little bit ways here, I can see again, right? This is my line item. I just have a monthly website maintenance retainer in this particular brand. I'm set up as a web builder. And so maybe I want to charge my clients on a weekly basis to maintain their website, right? That's the kind of the concept there. And here I have a payment plan. And you might be wondering, why is the payment plan only one installment? And we're going to talk a lot about that in just a little bit. But again, this is the recurrence that I created for this particular project. And we're going to kind of work our way back towards this. Now, the important thing to note from this particular page as well that I haven't yet discussed is that if you notice here under the payment plan and as well as this particular line item, I can't actually make any changes to what's listed here, right? In a recurring invoice, once I set it up, I can no longer make changes to the way that that recurrence is going to create invoices. I would need to stop or end the recurrence in order to actually make those changes. The idea is that since autopay, which we're going to talk about as well, is built into this, right? I could have my clients enrolled in autopay, and I wouldn't want to basically pull the rug for my clients and make some changes to the amount that they're paying while they're in the middle of that flow if they're enrolled in autopay. So the idea being here that I'm not going to be able to make any changes to this recurrence once it's begun. If I wanted to make some changes, I would need to end this recurrence and then start a new one with those changes applied to that new recurrence template. The last thing I want to note here on this particular page is that over here on the right-hand side, it's going to list out all of the individual invoices that this recurrence has created. And like I mentioned before, this particular recurrence has only made one invoice so far, but I can easily click on it and it's going to take me directly to the invoice that was created by that recurrence. If there were multiple invoices that had already been created by that recurring invoice, it would be listed there kind of just in a list, which is really helpful to see like where each invoice came from, especially if you have multiple recurrences running at the same time. Let me know if there's any questions before we jump into how to actually build one of these things. And I don't imagine there would be too many questions, but I just want to make sure I'm going one step at a time. Recurring invoices are a really frequent topic that I discuss when I'm doing screen share calls with our users. So I know that there's a lot of little bits and pieces, and it's different from the way you might normally invoice folks. So I just want to make sure we take it one step at a time. Cool. All right. So let's ignore this recurring invoice for the time being. And let's say that maybe I just want to set up a new recurrence for my client, Jess Brown, right? The way I would do that is exactly from this page. I could go ahead and say add. Right now I'm under the recurring invoices subsection of this invoices tab, and I'm going to go ahead and say add. Now here is essentially how we would go ahead and make a brand new recurrence for this particular project. And like I mentioned before, right, there's nowhere else in the system that we're going to be able to make a recurring invoice template. It's unlike a lot of our other things in Dubsado where I can find all of my master templates here on the left-hand side. Since it's going to be client and project specific, right, I'm only going to be doing that from within the project. So don't get crossed up if you're looking for a place to set this up elsewhere. It's going to be within the project. Now, let's kind of go from top down and work our way through the settings, and I'll make sure we understand everything that we're working with here. So we're going to double back to autopay at the end. For right now, I'm going to leave this at optional, right? And if you're familiar with our autopay settings, you have the ability to say disabled, right? So no autopay whatsoever, optional, which is the default. The client can choose to opt into autopay if they want to, or required, which would force them to enroll in autopay when they go ahead and make a payment. Again, we're going to double back to that a little bit at the end, all right? First and most important thing that we're going to look at here, firstly, is the send every setting, right? Which is determining how often or the cadence by which the recurrence is going to be creating invoices for us and for the client. Well, hang on one second. I got a question. Someone was asking, can you export the information on a recurring invoice as a copy for yourself? Could you clarify your question a little bit? I'm not sure exactly how you would want to export that information. I'm trying to think of what you might have meant. Are you basically saying that you wanted to keep track of the invoices that were created by that recurrence? If that was the case, you could certainly go to the individual invoices that the recurrence is creating and download a PDF of that invoice if you wanted to. But there's not going to be a good way to export the actual recurrence template within the project, so to speak. But feel free to clarify your question if I did a poor job answering it. Okay. Anyhow, this send every, right, is going to be dictating the cadence is what I would call it, right? So the how often we want to send this particular recurrence to our client. So I have the ability to enter a number value here. And the most important thing, right, is months, weeks, or years, right? We don't really have a situation, or it's not common that people want to send an invoice once every day, but you could probably punch in some decimal places to get this to get to days. But most commonly, I would say 1 month is the by far the most common situation we're going to set this to, which is kind of why it's the default setting. So let's say that for Jess, I do want to have it set to 1 month, and we'll just leave it at that. Now, the starts on date here is going to default to whatever the current day is, right? Today's the 18th, so it's showing the 18th. Now, let's say I wanted to set this up for the future. Maybe I wanted to bill on October 1st, right? I could punch in October 1st and say, yep, starts on October 1st. So that's nice because I could set this up ahead of time, right? Maybe you're working with a client and you know that they're going to be onboarding over the course of the rest of this month and you want them to receive that first invoice on the first of the month. That works fantastically, right? I can set this up ahead of time, tell it to start once we're finished working through our other settings. And then I know that on the first, they're going to receive that invoice. It's going to happen automatically. The key here is that whatever starts on date you pick, that's going to be dictating when they receive their subsequent invoices as well, right? So if I pick the first, right, it's going to be looking at 1 month from then. It's going to pick the next first, right? So it's going to be November, December, so on and so forth for the next time they receive that invoice. If you were to pick a month with 31, right? So if I picked 31 and there's not a month with 31 days in it, right? It's going to go to the first of that next month. So it is just looking at 30 days essentially if you're looking at 1 month. But the key here is that I want to make sure that I am aware that whatever date I'm setting this to start on is the day that they're going to receive their first invoice. Essentially, when the system creates a new invoice via that recurrence, it's going to send them that invoice as soon as it gets created. And that's regardless of whether or not you have a payment plan on there or not. And the payment plan might have a different due dates on there. It's always going to send the client that invoice it creates on the starts on dates according to the recurrence. So that might get a couple folks crossed up because later on we're going to see we can set a payment plan up. But the key here is that starts on date is really the one that's dictating what day it's getting sent out. So let me know if there's questions about that in the chat. Now, the ends on date, which is also important too, is we can set a particular date we want this to end on, but we can also leave it as empty essentially or defaulting to never, right? This is helpful for like an ad infinitum subscription plan, right? Maybe you have clients that are just subscribing to you until they opt out. We would definitely want to leave this on never because it's just always going to send them an invoice, in this case, once a month until they want to stop, right? Maybe you have no idea how much time the client wants to spend working with you or subscribing to your subscription plan. That would be a really useful case for never, right? Let's say maybe I only wanted to do a recurring invoice for a limited amount of time. So if I'm starting on the 18th, I would say, okay, I want to bill this client once a month for 6 months, maybe. I would want to make sure I pick the date after that particular last invoice is going to get sent out. So let me demonstrate to you real quick. Let's say here, so we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So in March, right, if I picked the 18th, which would be exactly 6 months from today, right, that may not guarantee that last invoice is going to get sent out. So what I would do is pick 1 day after. That's always what I recommend, is to go ahead and pick 1 day after that last invoice is going to get sent out. And again, this is only relevant if you need to have a particular end date. This is if you already know as the business owner that you're going to be billing your clients X number of times. If you don't know if you don't know, right, how many times you're going to be billing your clients, or they don't know, right, how long they're going to work with you, leave it at never. That's really my recommendation there. Danielle was asking, can you adjust the time or does it start on whatever day you select with the time you set it up? Good question, Danielle. So within our settings here, we can't really pick the time of day it's going to send out. We just know it's going to send out that day. Essentially, the way our worker processes these things is it's kind of looking at every single invoice that needs to go out that day, and it's going to send them out in whatever order they kind of came in. So there's no way for us to dictate exactly the time of day, if that's what you're asking, but it is always going to go out on that particular day. And we can say with confidence and certainty that it's going to go out on that day. Let me know if that answers your question or not, Danielle. Cool. Okay. Let me know. Anyhow, cool. Sweet. Daniel says thank you. All right. So I want to say, let's go ahead and leave this on 319. Let's say we'll just do it for 6 months. But again, like I said, if you don't know how many times you want your client to receive an invoice, leave it on never. So now that we've set up our cadence, right? I have it sending out once every month starting today, and I want it to end 6 months from now, right? We're going to have all those things punched in. Now we can go ahead and build our line item, right? And this is going to work exactly like you're probably accustomed to if you've used Dubsado's invoice builder before. We can go ahead and manually enter a line item, and I can also easily pick a package if I want to. The really important thing to recall here is like the fact that whatever value that I am billing the client in a recurring invoice, I'm trying to gain every cent of that value every time they pay. So if you look over here on the right-hand side, right, I have some packages built in here, and these packages are like my main packages, my meat and potatoes, right? My basic web design package and my premier web design package. And they're both pretty expensive, right? Maybe this one, I can't recall. I think it's like $1,000. This one's like $3,000. If I want to receive $500 every month as part of a maintenance program, I wouldn't want to pick one of my main packages because it's going to ask the client to pay that full grand total every month, because later on, as we'll see, the payment plan, it's only going to be one installment if I have a payment plan on there. So make sure that you're aware of how you're setting up your particular invoice line item, because there's not going to be a way to break up that amount. If you need the client to pay in installments and it's not necessarily on a recurring basis, you're better off using a regular invoice with a payment plan just to take your main package and break it into installments that way. The recurrence is always meant to bill the client the exact same amount every single month. So bear that in mind. In this case, let's say I don't have a package for my retainer program. I'm going to go ahead and just add one in here. So I just already have monthly website maintenance retainer. I'm going to make sure I add a quantity of at least one. Obviously, feel free to add a description if you like. And then I'm going to set a price. And we'll just say $500 for right now, just a nice round number. Obviously, I could go ahead and add in a tax or a category. In this case, we'll go ahead and skirt past that real quick. So if I go ahead and say add item, now I've got $500. So right now what this invoice is telling me, or this recurring invoice template is telling me, is that once a month, starting today, I'm going to be asking the client to pay me exactly $500. Not less than that, right? I want to make sure that that's the key thing here, is that if you're thinking, okay, I don't know if my client's going to want to pay me the full $500, then you might want to adjust the price or adjust how you're going about billing the client for that amount, because this recurring invoice is always going to be asking for the client to pay exactly $500. Hopefully that makes sense. Let me know if there's questions about that. Cool. Moving right along into, I think, the most important piece that does cross people up. So now that we've got our cadence set up and our line item set up, we can talk about payment plan. Now, on a recurring invoice, I don't have to have a payment plan. It's going to recur once a month, and it's going to be asking the client to pay that $500 every month, even if I don't add a payment plan in here. The key is that I can add a payment plan to this recurring invoice template if I want to set due dates, sort of, and if I want to remind the client. That's the biggest one. If you want to remind your clients that their payment is coming up, or maybe that they've missed their payments, the payment plan is going to be your friend. So let's talk about how I would go about setting up that payment plan if I did want to have that be the case. Okay. So if you have an existing payment plan, you can obviously pick it here, but I want to go ahead and create a new payment plan so y'all can see how exactly you might go about setting that up. So I'm going to click add new payment plan. And in this case, I'm going to click add installments just the once. Like I said, we're billing our client the total amount of our line item every single month in this case. And so I want to make sure I'm not adding more than one installment. If I did that, that's sort of defeating the purpose of a recurring invoice, right? The idea of a recurring invoice is that they're going to pay that entire amount every single time. And so if I have two installments, it's really not going to work well, and it's defeating the purpose of the recurring invoice. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that installment there. Now, if I click into this installment setting here, we can make sure we've got a couple things specifically correct. So in a recurring invoice, the only really good way to set a due date is to use a relative trigger. And specifically, I want to make sure I pick, instead of any of these project start or end dates or even the contract, I want to make sure I pick after payment plan applied to invoice. That is the only trigger you should be using on a payment plan within a recurring invoice. And let's talk about why. So if I were to do anything else in here before project start or end dates, that's a fixed date and time, right? Let's say that my project date was October 1st. This recurring invoice would successfully set the due dates, if I said 0 days before project start date as the 1st, right? I think right now I have it as, okay, let's change this just to match what I'm talking about here. Let's pretend my project date is the 1st. And we'll go ahead and mirror this. So it's 1 day. Cool. So if my project date is the 1st, right, and I want to set the first installment to be due on the 1st, that'll work the first time. But the real issue is that subsequent invoices created by the recurrence is still going to be using a copy of this payment plan. And that date will then be in the past once I get to November, right? That's the big issue with using any of these other triggers in here, is that all these other triggers are looking specifically at one date. In this case, right, the project start date or the end dates. If I had a range, I could use the end dates. But that date is always going to be fixed in time, and it's not going to be changing unless you're manually changing it. But I really don't recommend doing that. The same thing is true about after a contract is signed by the client, right? In reality, that's happening just the one time within a project. And once that date is set, it will eventually be in the past. And for future invoices created by the recurrence, it's going to mess up your due dates. So the only one that prevents that from happening is after payment plan applied to invoice, because what's happening on the back end is every time our system sees, okay, we want to go ahead and create an invoice on a monthly basis dictated by our starts on date. it's going to be creating a new invoice and it's going to be applying a copy of whatever payment plan you've set up here. And so in this case, 0 days after payment plan applied follows that perfectly, right? It's able to say, okay, cool, we're making a new invoice. We're going to take our payment plan, which is looking for 0 days after payment plan applied. We're going to apply that payment plan. The day that payment plan is applied is the day that that invoice was created. And I know this can be a little bit hairy, a little bit confusing, but hopefully that clears it up if you're like, why is that the case? Or you could just say, you know what, I trust Trevor. I'm going to go ahead and set this up with 0 days after payment plan applied. Either way is fine. But the idea being that whenever it creates that new invoice, it's applying a payment plan if you have one set up, and that payment plan is using the date it was created, the date it was applied. So it's a bit cyclical, but that would be the way to have that due date be refreshed every month is a good way to think about it. The first month, it's going to apply this payment plan as soon as I click start recurrence, and 0 days after the payment plan is applied is today. Next month, as soon as that recurrence creates the new invoice, it's going to apply the payment plan, and the payment plan would be applied that day. So it would be October 18th, and so on and so forth. Hopefully that makes sense, but that's why we have to use after payment plan applied to invoice. I think that setting it up at 0 days is also the most easy on your mind as far as thinking about these things, but you certainly could do something like this: 3 days after payment plan applied to due date or applied to invoice, right? That's setting the due date at the 21st, but bear in mind that regardless of whatever date I set here, the client is still going to receive their invoice on the starts on dates or in accordance to the cadence there. So if I set something like this up, right? So 9/21, I want it to be due 3 days after today. It won't be due until 3 days from now, but the client will still receive their first invoice today as soon as I click start recurrence. That's essentially how the recurring invoice system works. So if you're someone that's trying to template out like when the client is going to be receiving their invoices, it can be helpful to think of the starts on date as just the first time they're receiving their invoice. And you can even use that as sort of a upcoming payment reminder, knowing that the starts on date is going to be when it's sending out that first invoice. This way we could do something like 3 days after would be, okay, now I can set up a reminder to be on the due dates. That would send them another email saying, hey, you have a payment due that particular day. Let's go ahead and add that on there. And then maybe I want to set up another reminder to send out a couple days after. Maybe I wanted to do 2 days after the due date. So this might sound a little funky, right? I have 2 reminders set up here, but the client is still receiving 3 emails. The first one is going to be coming from this starts on, right? It's going to be sent today as soon as I start it. Then 3 days from now, it's going to send them a reminder, which is technically 0 days before the due dates. That's the, hey, it's due today email. And then 2 days after that, they're receiving another one for a total of 3 emails. So there's a variety of ways to set this up. And just like our other invoices, you can set up as many reminders as you like. The key here is that in this case, we cannot set up a reminder to be before the due date because the invoice hasn't been created yet, right? That's really the big issue here. And I think some folks get crossed up on that. If I go ahead and toggle this back to 0 days, and let's set this to maybe, let's do 1 day after. Do it like that. So I have this set up to set up, it's due today. I'm sending another email tomorrow, another email the day after, or 2 days after that. I can't set up a reminder to go out beforehand, right? Like I know that today is the 18th, but if you're someone that's setting this up to maybe be due or to be started at the beginning of next month, you cannot remind the clients about an invoice that does not yet exist. That's really what I'm trying to say here. So like if I did the example where I'm someone that wants to set this up starting on October 1st, I can't remind the clients via the recurring invoice about this invoice until the 1st because the recurrence has yet to create it. That's really what I'm trying to get across there. I know it's a bit confusing, so let me know if there's questions. I see that Dan asked a question here in the chat, so let's see what Dan has to say. Dan asked, how do you set up a recurring invoice from a proposal? The use case is a new client receives a proposal from Dubsado and signs up for website design package and one-time cost and monthly website maintenance plan, which is a recurring monthly service. The invoice for both gets sent upon accepting the proposal and packages. Really good question, Dan. So this is something I was going to mention later, but you preempted it, and I love it because it's a really good question. So the way that you're thinking about it is, I think, entirely correct, right? You've got a one-time cost, which would be part of your proposal. And if you have a recurring cost associated, right? In this case, it's your website maintenance plan. You can use a recurring invoice to do so. The key here is that the recurring invoices in Dubsado are not linked to proposals whatsoever. So what you would need to do is exactly like you mentioned, send them your proposal, have them accept that for the one-time cost. And then once they've done that, you can go into their project and set up this recurring invoice to go ahead and bill them separately for those monthly maintenance fees. there's not going to be a way to combine those two things, right? To have the proposal dictate both the one-time cost and a recurring cost, at least not yet currently. I know that that's something that some users have asked for in the past, or a way to maybe automate this a little bit more. But currently speaking, there's not going to be a way to have it be done more automatically than just setting it up within the project. Hopefully that answers your question, Dan. Cool. Yeah, I would say that's the one downside to recurring invoices, because they're really powerful in the sense that as soon as we set it up, right, we've done kind of the homework on when we want them to go out, how often we want them to go out, how much they're for. We've done that work. Then once the client is receiving them, it's hands off. You can set it and forget it. You can just have your client paying you automatically, which is great. But you do still have to set it up, right? There's not going to be a way to build it into your flow that's existing, maybe your proposal, contract, invoice. It is kind of in its own world off by itself there. Dan says, thanks. A workflow that covers that in the future would be helpful. I'm good for now. Cool. I'm glad I answered your question, Dan. And I agree. Yeah, a workflow in the future to be able to set up a recurring invoice would be amazing. I think that it's something that we're working on. So hopefully sometime soon. But for now, let's continue on with our example here. So hopefully I haven't confused you all too much about this 0 days after payment plan applied to invoice. But like I mentioned, it's the idea that the invoice has to get created first. And when you're thinking about, okay, when is my invoice getting created? We're always looking on our starts on date, right? That's the biggest thing there. That's probably the most important setting within this entire template is that starts on date. And it's going to help dictate the rest of your behavior in your recurring invoice. Let's revert this back to our simpler example of it just starting today. We'll move on from there. Okay. So right now I've got it sending once a month, starting on today, like I mentioned earlier. We're going to go ahead and have this due on today. And again, I don't have to set up a payment plan to set due dates, right? It's still going to be sending to the clients. It's going to be asking them for payments on that starts on dates. But in this case, I wanted to set reminders up, and that's why I'm using this payment plan. Now, the thing I haven't discussed is amount due, right? This plays into the fact that I don't want to have more than one installment, like I was mentioning earlier. So I want to make sure I'm always asking for 100% of the value. Now, I can do that one of two ways. I could leave this on divide equally. That's totally fine. The default setting of divide equally will do you just fine. It will always default to whatever the total amount is, so long as there's one installment. If you accidentally add a second installment, you'll end up with 50-50, and you don't want that, right? Now, you could also go ahead and say percentage and add in 100%. Oops. That's totally fine too. As you can see here, it's showing $500. Regardless, we want to make sure that one way or another, we're setting it to the entire total of this invoice, in this case, $500. That's really the key there for the amount due. Don't have to worry about it too much else. If you leave it on divide equally, the system is smart and it will know, okay, cool, I'm going to divide the entire total of the invoice by 1 to end up with that value. We end up with our total value. Sweet. So like I said, we have our reminders on here. We've got our due date. We've got everything else set. And that's the last thing I need to go ahead and configure. So now that I've built this invoice out and I've got my reminders set up, I can go ahead and say save. And once we've done that, we've kind of gone through the cadence. We've gone through our line item. We've gone through a payment plan. If you want to have reminders, then we're done. That's all we need to do to have this set up to go ahead and run for the next 6 months for this client. I know I went through it pretty slowly and there's a lot of things to talk about, but you could get this done pretty dang quickly once you kind of get the hang of setting these things up. I think that this could be a really helpful way to save you time. You're like, okay, cool. I've got my client, Jenny. I'm billing her for 6 months. I'm going to set this up. I'm going to go ahead and get it running. As soon as you set it and say starts, you know you're good to go. So let's actually go ahead and click start recurrence and we can see what happens here. And again, like I mentioned at the outset, once I click start, I can no longer make changes. So you might take a moment just to double check the things that you've done to make sure it is actually doing what you want it to do, because otherwise you're going to have to click end recurrence and create a new one if you wanted to make changes. So the system's thinking about things right now. I'm going to go ahead and refresh the page in just a moment here. And let's see when it sends that first invoice out. As soon as you click start recurrence, it should go out relatively right away. Let's see here. Cool. So as soon as I refresh the page, we can see invoice 6. And to answer that question, Danielle, a little bit earlier, right? You could sort of game out when that first one goes out, depending on when you start the recurrence, but subsequent ones, it's difficult to pinpoint exactly when it's going to send. It should try to mirror exactly the time of day that you actually set it up the first time, but in my experience, it's not exact. It's going to go out sometime that day. Cool. I see I have a question in the Q&A. Let's take a look. Jamie's asking, I charge with retainers and already have the project set up. How would I then change this manual invoice to a monthly retainer that includes a payment reminder that goes out with it? I know you said you can't send a reminder before the invoice is due, so is there a way to configure? I send retainer invoices 30 days before it's due. Okay, so I guess my question for you, Jamie, would be kind of what I was mentioning before. For your retainers, is it something that's going to infinity? They're just going to keep paying until they decide to stop working with you, or is there a set end date? In your case, if you wanted to send a reminder 30 days before it's due, there's a couple ways to do that, right? You essentially could, instead of using a recurring invoice, if there is a firm end date, you could simply make a regular invoice with a payment plan that's asking them to pay installments of whatever your grand total is per month on that cadence until you're done. If you did it with a recurring invoice, you could essentially have that starts on date like we were talking about, so it's starting on, act as your 30-day reminder, right? You could have the due date technically set to 30 days later, but they're still going to receive that invoice on that starts on date and on that recurrence schedule, essentially. So you do have no set end dates. Okay, Jamie, cool. So for no set end date, let me review what you mentioned here. Let's see here. So to answer your earlier question, I think that's what you were asking at the beginning of that question. If you already have an invoice set up for a client, there's not a way to take an existing invoice. If I go to the invoice list, I can't take this invoice, or maybe this one, for example, and turn it into a recurring invoice. Once an invoice is created, it just is a regular invoice. I would need to separately go to recurring invoices and set up a recurrence like we've just discussed. So if you already are billing your clients in one invoice, maybe you wait until they pay that one invoice and then set up the recurrence. Or like I mentioned, you can set up the recurrence to start on after you believe they're going to go ahead and pay. So there's that piece. Now, the payment reminder, like I said, can be set up in the recurring invoice to go out after that invoice is created. The key is just that the invoice has to get created. So if I was to actually kind of mock up what Jamie's talking about, let's add a new one in here. So if I do once a month, let's say that you wanted them to receive the reminder, and I say reminder in quotes because in reality, the invoice is getting created, right, on the 1st, but it's not actually due until the 30th, right? I would make sure I'd set the starts on to whatever day you want them to receive the reminder. Right? Again, we're thinking of our starts on dates as the first reminder is the best way to think about it because they're always going to receive the invoice on that starts on date. Then I could go ahead and add my line item the same way. Let's go ahead and say $500. And then for the payment plan, right? Now, I could go ahead and say relative. And in this case, we would probably just do 30 to make it easy, 30 days after payment plan applied. Now note that this isn't changing any functionality. All it's doing is just technically earmarking that payment to be due 30 days after the starts on dates, but they're still going to receive the email on the 1st, and now it's just not due until the 30th. So that's how I would set it up for your case, Jamie. Now there is one thing I want to point out to y'all in case somebody who's got eagle eyes is seeing it here. You can see that I set this due date up to be, not today or not on the 1st, right? There's a tiny little bug that's been around for a little bit that's essentially is just a visual error, right? 30 days after the payment plan applied to the invoice is not the 18th. 30 days after the invoice has been created and the payment plan applied would be the 31st. So don't let this throw you off. It's just a visual error. Once you start the recurrence, the due dates will actually be correct and showing correct on your invoice. Don't let that panic you. Just use the actual triggers to figure out what day that would be. I know it's common to use this generated date to determine, okay, that is the right dates. I know it's just a little bit off-putting there, but don't let that panic you. Anyhow, Jamie, hopefully that answers your question. Just use the starts on dates as whatever date you want them to first be reminded of that invoice, and then you can set the due date to whatever you like afterwards. Now, this will change when we're talking about autopay, so stay tuned for that conversation because it's going to be a little bit different if your client is enrolled in autopay. Cool. All right. Let's go back to the chat here. Neil asks, is it possible to send the recurring invoice to more than one email address automatically? Really good question, Neil. Unfortunately, the answer is no. The recurring invoice is going to automatically get sent to whoever's the primary client on the project. And that's true even if you have an alternate client associated, right? If you're familiar with Dubsado to some extent, you know that you can have an alternate client associated with one particular person. That alternate client is only going to be automatically CC'd on manually sent emails. Since the recurring invoice is an automatic function, it's not going to add that CC in there automatically. So what you might do in that case, Neil, is if you need someone to receive, more than one person to receive an invoice created by the recurrence, we can wait till the recurrence creates the invoice. In this case, if I go to invoice list, I'm going to just get rid of that example real quick. If I go to the invoice list, the recurrence I just started earlier, right? Invoice 6. Now that it's been created, my client, Jess, will have received that email. I could obviously come back in here and just say send via email, and then I can punch in a different person if I wanted to send that additionally to somebody else. Now, I know that's not ideal because it's a separate email thread. I understand that could be a bit annoying to kind of have two different threads going with two different people, but that would be the way to do it, is once it's created, you can send it to whoever you like. I could also go to the emails tab. Now I can see this new invoice for Jess Brown. This is the one that just sent 6 minutes ago. I could go ahead and resend this just that way if I click that little arrow icon to resend it here. There's a couple different ways to send that invoice out. You could even, I believe, type in a reply. No, it's not gonna let me do that. No, I think the best way to do it is the two different ways that I showed you there. To go ahead and just resend it from here, or to go to the invoices tab and send it out. Cool. Any other questions, folks? I know that some of these concepts are a little bit hairy, a little bit hard to wrap your brain around when you're figuring out the dates. But I want to move on to some of the email communication as well as autopay. So before we move out of this phase that we're kind of looking at, we're just making a recurrence. And you can see here, actually, let's talk a little bit more about that too. So just for our sanity, I'm going to delete this blank invoice because it's not doing us any good. Okay. So now that this recurrence is started, I'm going to delete this one that I was doing for Jamie as well. Cool. Now we are left with, or go ahead and refresh. Sweet. Now that we have that, this is the one I did earlier last week just because I wanted to have an example in there. And this is the one I just created. We can see now, right? They both have had 1 cent. And if I click into this, it's going to be the same way that we looked at the very beginning, right? Since the invoice 6 is the one it created, and it's not going to make the next one until October 18th at 10:09 a.m. So now that we have that, we can go to the invoice list. We can see a list of all the invoices that were created. I can click into invoice 6 and see, cool. Maybe I want to double check that the invoice is appearing how I wanted it to be for the client after it's gotten created. I could go ahead and say send, open a new window. You guys seeing that? Let's share this tab. There we go. Perfect. So now I can confirm this is the invoice that was created by my recurrence. And I can see here that this does look how I want it to look, right? Now, if I was the client, I could click pay now. I could go ahead and pay if you want to use Link. If you're not familiar with Link, it's a relatively new addition to Dubsado payments. It lets clients pay using pre-saved information on Link, which is a Stripe product, really handy. But yeah, just want to make sure you know that you can go ahead and double check your invoices. It's going to look exactly like a normal Dubsado invoice once it's created. I think that's probably the confusing thing for a lot of folks is that the idea is we're setting up the recurrence, and this is sort of an unfamiliar looking page. You've got some information here at the top, and you're not able to really preview what that invoice looks like until it's created. I think that's a lot of the things too in this is that you're waiting until it's created to send a reminder, for example. You're waiting until it's created to double check it. Just know that once you start the recurrence, it's going to send that first one, and then you can kind of go from there, knowing that your reminder is going to go out off of that and double check the invoice. Okay. Any other questions about some of the stuff we've talked about so far before I talk about autopay and some emails? No? Okay. Cool. Okay. So all of the examples I've showed so far have had autopay set to optional. And right now I'm not enrolled in autopay as the client, right? The autopay in a recurring invoice is somewhat separate from the autopay on payment plans. And let's talk about it. When I say that they're separate, let's go to templates. Let's go to payment plans. And we can take a look here. These are just all of my payment plans within my account. And if you're familiar, right, we can set up an autopay setting on a payment plan template itself. Maybe I have a particular payment plan that I know always wants to have autopay. And maybe I have others that it's optional and others still where it's disabled. That's totally fine to have on your payment plans. Bearing in mind that, when I'm setting up a recurring invoice, I always want to make sure that I'm having just one installment is relevant in the sense that you might have a payment plan template in here just for your recurring invoices that could have its own autopay setting. But the key is that the recurring invoice is not looking at this payment plan setting to determine what's active for the client. It's going to be looking at your global brand settings to determine if autopay is disabled, optional, or required. So don't let that confuse you. If you're going to be like, hey, I want to set up recurring invoices and I always want to make sure it's required, let's go ahead and take a look at where you would set that up. So I'm going to go to settings. Then we're going to go to payments and invoices. Now here under the default autopay setting, I have it set to optional on a brand level. So I could go ahead and say edit autopay, and I could set this to disabled or required if I wanted to change it. Now, you might be wondering, hey, I already have a client that is currently enrolled in autopay or currently has a recurring invoice. If you go ahead and change the autopay setting here, it's only going to take effect for new enrollments. So it's not going to affect anybody who's already on it. Maybe you have folks who are already enrolled in autopay that's required, and you want to change it to disabled on a brand level going forward. It's not going to unenroll those folks who are already enrolled in autopay. So know that, just don't worry about it from there. But let's go ahead and say I want to set this to required, right? I say update settings. Now it's going to require folks to enroll in autopay when that invoice is generated. Or if I go back to projects, let's take a look at another brand new recurring invoice template. If you go to invoices, I go to recurring invoices, set up a new one here. Now this autopay is just mirroring what's in my brand settings. That's really what I'm trying to get across there. This autopay setting here is only looking at what's in your brand settings, and it's not looking at any autopay setting in a payment plan, since there are two different places to set that up. Hopefully that was a clear demonstration, right? That you could see in your payment plan templates, you can set up autopay. That's really only for regular invoices. If you're looking at autopay on a recurring invoice, you can set it here within the recurring invoice, and I can certainly override it to be different from my brand settings. But if you're not paying attention, it's going to be looking just at your brand settings. That's the key there. Gracia asks, are invoices given a new number every time or a sub number, like invoices 6 or 6-1, 6-2, 6-3? Good question, Gracia. So our invoice numbers, if I go to the invoice list, those are just counting up from whatever number I set it to. If I wanted to use a different numbering system, I could click into an invoice. I can actually click. It doesn't look like you can click here, but I can. And I can set this to, I don't know, 100 if I wanted to. Oops, on the dash. I can set to 100. If I do that, now the next invoice that's generated in the system, anywhere in the system, whether that's from a recurring invoice, a proposal got added to a project, you manually create an invoice, doesn't matter. The next new invoice is going to be invoice 101. So it's just going to count up from whatever number you manually put in there. If you don't manually put anything in there, it just starts from 1 and counts up, obviously, from there. So there's not any sub numbers to answer your question. Hopefully that makes sense. Cool. So let's go back to the recurring invoice here. Now, in this particular recurrence that I have set up, we're just kind of starting a fresh one. I have this set to required. So that means that when the client pays, they have to enroll in autopay. They have to accept the terms of autopay. So let's go ahead and just build this out real quick. I'll leave this on starts today. We'll leave the ends on at never because it doesn't really matter for this example. We'll add a new line item again. The same thing. There we go. Now, I could go ahead and set up a payment plan to add some reminders to this if I want to. But the key here is that if I set up a payment plan and maybe I wanted to do something like this, relative 0 days before project start date, right? Divide equally. Maybe I wanted to have the due date set to 3 days after the payment plan is applied to the project, right? If I wanted to have 3 days instead of 0 days like I normally would, that's going to look like the payment's due 3 days from now. But when they enroll in autopay, because remember that they're required to, it's still going to bill them in accordance to the starts on date. So let's say I'm a client and I receive an invoice generated by this particular invoice, recurring invoice. It's going to be due, quote unquote, on the 21st. And I could obviously pay this whenever for the first time. But when I first go to pay it, let's say it was on the 21st, right? On the due dates of the invoice, subsequent payments, so once a month, is still going to automatically get deducted from my accounts on the 18th of every month. It's not going to be going at the 21st. So the due date is a bit of a misnomer if you have a required auto pay. That's really what I wanted to get across to you all here, is that we're really looking at just the start date for determining when the client will be automatically billed. I know that's a little bit confusing, but again, think about your payment plan as just a means to an end to set reminders up and not as a way to dictate when the client is going to be billed or splitting up your installments, right? Because we're always billing for that full installments there. The key here is the starts on date is the absolute most important setting in this recurring invoice. Okay, so let's actually go ahead and start this one too, and I can show you what that looks like. Let's see here, 3 days. Yeah, let's leave it at that. That's fine. Okay, so save. I didn't add any reminders on this case as it doesn't matter for our example, but let's go ahead and say start recurrence. We'll give it just a second to go ahead and generate that. Cool. All right. Cool. We got invoice 101. As I said, I set that other one to 100. So now it's counting up from there. We got invoice 101. So if I click on this, now we're taken directly to invoice 101. And let's say I sent this to the client and I'll go ahead and view this as the client. Cool. So now that autopay is required, you'll notice here that pay now button next to my installments is gone because it knows I'll need to actually enroll in autopay here at the bottom. So click pay now. And as you can see, right, the same information for link pops up. I can use my Visa. I can pay another way if I want to, but this autopay enrollment pops up because the system knows I have to enroll in autopay as the client. And as you notice here, right, if I check this box, I have to pay that. I have to check that in order to pay. But firstly here, it says starting from September 18th, right, it's going to be billing once every month. So if you're ever confused about that, you can always double check as the client and see, okay, when's it actually going to bill them if you're getting confused with your due dates. But just know the recurrence is going to bill your client dictated by that starts on date for your recurrence. Just use that as your guiding light. That's really what I wanted to get across here. But anyhow, with required autopay, it can be a really convenient way to, like I said, set it and forget it. And if you're requiring your clients to enroll in autopay, you know they're going to be billed once every however often you want them to be automatically, no matter what. Now, the one thing I didn't mention at the outset is let's talk a little bit about payment types, right? Because with Dubsado payments, we actually have the ability to actually have clients enroll in autopay using a credit card or an ACH payment, right? Which was not a feature that we had in Dubsado before Dubsado payments. And it's a really powerful one because ACH payments obviously have that much lower processing rate. So if you're someone that's like, hey, I really want to save money on processing fees, you could have a Dubsado payments account connected. You could turn credit cards off and have autopay payments going through ACH and just ACH alone, which is really cool. Now, if you are someone who's not using Dubsado payments, you can still use autopay, on recurring invoices or elsewhere in the system, but you'll only be able to accept credit card payments for autopay. So that's a big advantage to Dubsado payments there. Cool. All right, let's close out of that. I think the last thing I really wanted to discuss was the communications around this, because I think this is the other piece that folks can get a little bit confused on. And once you're aware of where to go to kind of set it up, you'll be good to go. So if I am setting up a recurrence, right, it's going to automatically send an email to my client as soon as I click start. You might be wondering, well, hey, you didn't watch me type this out, right? I didn't type any of that out. It just sent it to the client. So where can I edit that? That would be a really good question. So that email that it's sending out is just using the default send email, canned email. So if we go down to templates and canned emails, if I want to look at my defaults templates, I can look at edit templates here. And the very top one, send invoice. And that's this email right here. Now, something that folks can run into is maybe they have some of their clients enrolled in autopay and required autopay for that matter. And some other of their services or clients are enrolled or not enrolled in autopay, right? It's optional or even disabled. And it can be a bit tough because it's one default send email or send invoice email that's set up for all of those instances, right? So your wording here is something that you might consider changing, right? If I'm somebody that has folks that are enrolled in autopay and have some other folks that are not enrolled in autopay, the wording would be slightly different, right? I might do something like this. Let's actually get rid of this real quick. For a situation like that, I might say something like, this is a reminder that you're processed if you are enrolled in autopay. There is no action needed if you are not enrolled in autopay. Access your invoice below. Now, of course, that's pretty blunt. I didn't really put any I didn't really kind of jazz that up too much, but the idea is clear there, right? It's basically accounting for both scenarios because it's the same email that a couple different groups of people might receive. That's really the key that I wanted to call out there, is that since this default email is what's used when the recurrence automatically sends the invoice each time, your wording might want to be general because it's going to go out to folks who are enrolled in autopay just the same as it's going to go out to folks who maybe are not enrolled in autopay. So you might want to have wording in there that's kind of a catch-all. And you're here in that invoice, send invoice templates to go ahead and make that change. As soon as I click save, right? Now the next time that a recurrence sends out an invoice, it's going to use that wording instead of the default wording that was there before. Oh, dang it. I had done so good. I made it this far without messing up my screen share, and dang. Lecka, I'm so sorry, everyone. I'll do that again, just in case y'all want to see. Can you guys see? Yeah, you can. I got a new personal record for myself. I made it to 50 minutes without messing up my screen share. So we're getting better, but we're not quite there yet. All right, folks. So let's take that from the top. The idea here is that there's one particular canned email template that is always going to be used when the recurrence sends that invoice out on the cadence, right? And that wording there is very general. And if you wanted to make sure that it's accounting for situations where it's just accounting for situations where clients are enrolled in autopay versus are not enrolled in autopay, we can go ahead and edit that template. The way we would do that is by going to templates and canned emails, which is where I'm at right now. Then from here, I could click edit templates. Now, if I go to send invoice, this is the particular canned email that's going to be used when that recurrence sends the invoice each time. As you can see here, I typed out, right? This is a reminder that automatic payment will be processed actually doesn't make too much sense. Let's just say that, hey there, if you're enrolled in autopay, there's no action needed. If you're not enrolled in autopay, access your invoice below. Obviously, you could add as much other wording around that as you like. This is very blunt, but the idea being that the wording in this default send invoice email should be accounting for the fact that some of your clients may be enrolled in autopay and some of them might not be. That's really the key that I wanted to go over here. Hopefully that makes sense. Let me know if there's questions about that before I move on. And I apologize, Malika. I was trying so hard to make sure I juggled my screens, and I just dropped the ball again. I apologize. Cool. All right. So the last thing I wanted to show you here on templates and then canned emails, pardon me, I'm so sorry, is under the edit templates, there's a couple other emails you should also be aware of. Now, if I go down here to the very bottom, we've got a couple different emails that regards to autopay. And autopay obviously being important because a lot of folks who set up recurring invoices want to have autopay either required or enabled. So if I have a client who does enroll in autopay, they're going to automatically receive this email right here. And so this is the one that you would go ahead and edit if you wanted to change the wording for alerting clients that they've enrolled in autopay. But by default, this is going to get sent out. I don't think too many folks have too many issues with this particular email. I just want you all to know that you can go to templates, canned emails, edit templates, and then you can click on this email right here to edit the wording that the clients will receive when they enroll in autopay. Likewise, keep in mind that the client can always opt out of autopay even after they've enrolled, right? You as the business owner can stop autopay at any time, and ending the recurrence will also stop that autopay. And the clients on their end, maybe they want to talk to you about your pricing or make a change. They can opt out of autopay whenever they like to as well by accessing the invoice. When either party cancels autopay, they'll receive this canned email, which is just basically saying, hey, it's been canceled for this particular invoice number. You're no longer being automatically charged. And that's going to tell them why did this happen. And it's going to list out to them that either you did it or maybe they did it. Either way, you might want to take some time to customize this particular canned email so that it reflects your brand voice, so that it reflects your policies as well. That way, you know where that wording is coming from, and you're not just a little bit mystified as to why a client received an email that you didn't send out. This is an automatic email that will always get sent out, whether you ended the recurrence or the autopay rather, or the client ended the autopay. Just bear that in mind. And the last one in here as well, I'm not payment plans, I apologize. Under canned emails. If I go to edit templates and then I go back to autopay failed, again, right, this will automatically get sent out if their automatic payment fails, right? Maybe they had insufficient funds or their credit card expired, that sort of thing. This is going to get sent out to them if their payment fails automatically. So bear in mind that you can go ahead and edit this as well if you have policies regarding failed payments. Malika asks, is this the same wording that will be sent with the reminder invoices? Good question. So if I go back to my recurrence, let's take a look. Bear in mind that we are setting up that payment plan kind of the same way that you normally would set up a payment plan in Dubsado. If I go back to recurring invoices, I can't actually edit any of these ones since I've started these ones. I didn't start, no, I did them. Yeah, these are all started. So I'm gonna go ahead and make a new one. But if I go down to payment plan and say create payment plan, and I wanna go ahead and add in some reminders, just set this to that real quick. Oops. There we go. And I say add reminder. You'll notice here under select an email, I can choose any canned email I like for our payment reminders. And if you recall the part that I was messed up my screen share on, right? The wording on your payment reminders is someplace that you might also consider customizing to account for the fact that some clients are enrolled in autopay and other clients are not, right? The idea here is that you can pick a different canned email for whatever you like, right? You can have whatever canned email you want for your reminders, and it is not the same wording that's being sent in the reminder emails as the previous ones that we were just looking at. Those are the default system emails. You can pick whatever email you like here, but you might have some canned emails set up for people who are on autopay, which would be helpful if your recurrence is set to required. And then maybe you have other reminder emails set up for people who are on optional or disabled because the wording might change. Really what I'm getting at is that some users have expressed like, oh, I didn't mean to send this email that's so strongly worded, right, to my client when they're already enrolled in autopay, where it's like, hey, you have a new invoice and I really need you to make a payment by this date. And they're already enrolled in autopay, so you don't need them to worry about it, right? That's the idea there. It's just being aware of which emails you're sending out to which clients, determined by if they're enrolled in autopay or not. But I digress. I know that wasn't your question, Malika, but simply put, the wording in these canned emails right here are not the same wording that you'll see in your reminders. You can pick whatever reminder email you want in your payment plan, and then these templates here are only sent in certain scenarios. The send invoice is automatically used when the recurrence starts and whenever it sends the next invoice. Then we have autopay failed that will automatically be used if their payment fails. Canceled is if you or the client cancels autopay, and the autopay enrollment confirms will be automatically sent to the client when they enroll in autopay. The reminder emails will be a separate email, and you can pick whatever canned email you like for that reminder email. Hopefully that makes sense, Malika. Okay, she also asked, if you have an auto reminder set to send 3 days after the due date and the client has already paid, does the system know not to send an email? Yeah, exactly right. So it's the same exact functionality as a normal invoice, right? If a client has made a payment before a reminder sends out, it no longer sends that reminder out since it's unneeded. They've already gone ahead and paid. So if someone's on autopay, just know that they are going to still receive the send invoice email, right? So which is why it makes sense that you would toggle the wording there, because like I mentioned before, right? Think about that send date, the starts on date, as your first reminder, because even if they're enrolled in autopay, they're still getting this invoice, which is why I typed out, this is a reminder that your automatic payment will be processed, right? If you're enrolled in autopay, there's no action needed. They're still enrolled in autopay, but they're still getting this email. So bear that in mind too when you're thinking about, hey, okay, if they do pay on time or if they're enrolled in autopay, right, they're obviously going to be paying on time, so they need to worry about reminders, but they're still receiving this email. That's what I was trying to get across. Let me know if there's questions about that, Malika. Cool. We're coming up on just under an hour here, and I did get through everything I wanted to talk about. I don't think there's too much else that I wanted to make sure I kind of shined a light on. If there are other questions about recurring invoices in general, please feel free to shoot them out there to me. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I think is going to be relevant for our discussion here on recurring invoices, but I did cover all the things that I wanted to talk about. To kind of summarize, recurring invoices are a really great way to streamline your process. If you have a set price points and a set amount of time that you want clients to be billed on, right? You can bill your client for the same amounts once a month or once a week or however often you want them to be done really easily by setting up a recurring invoice and walking away from it, especially if you have autopay set to required. It's a really great way to have those retainer services charged or your subscription services charged without having too much extra work. You're going to set up that recurring invoice like we talked about, and then once it's going, you don't have to worry about it. Cool. So Jamie might have a question. I'm not sure. Might have been a mistype. Take your time, Jamie. We got plenty of time here. If you got a question, let's take a look. As you can see, these are all of my invoice emails coming through here. And these all sent out before I edited that before I edited that send invoice email. But if I did edit that send invoice email and then generate a new invoice to get sent out, it would use that custom email wording there. I'll give it just another minute or two in case there's any other questions. Looks like Jamie might have had a question. But if not, I really appreciate everyone being here. I really appreciate y'all taking the time to talk about recurring invoices. It's one of the more kind of buried concepts, I think, in Dubsado, simply because it's not listed here under our templates page. And we're making a new sort of template for the recurrence on every single project. So I think a lot of users maybe don't know it's there or aren't aware of how useful it could be, because it is just kind of here under recurring invoices within a particular project. But it's going to save you a ton of time from having to build out an invoice once a month, every single month. Even if you have your packages built out, you still take time to make that invoice each and every time. Set up the recurring invoice instead to save you the time there. Go ahead and build it out once. It's going to send every month, however often you want it to send out. And with required auto pay, you can walk away from it knowing you're going to get paid, which is fantastic. Oh, no worries, Jamie, at all. I'm glad it was helpful. Cool. All right, folks, we're just at an hour here. Like I said, I really appreciate everyone taking the time today to go ahead and be with me here. And look forward to another webinar next week. It's going to be fantastic. We'll have another specialist on to talk about another concept. And we're going to be having more webinars going forward in the future. We really like this cadence of having webinars about once a week. So if this is helpful for you, please stay tuned. We've got a ton of different topics coming up. And I love doing these. I love doing little demos for folks to understand the system a little bit better. So if you have questions, send us a chat at hello@Dubsado. Or if you have any questions here in the chat too while I'm still talking, feel free to throw them in there. But otherwise, we will see you really soon on another webinar. And I appreciate everyone's time for being here today. Thank you so much.